Today, we're going to dig into one of the most dramatic stories in the entire crypto space, the epic failures of early DAOs. It's a story packed with sky-high ambition, catastrophic disaster, and ultimately some pretty incredible innovation that was born from the ashes.
I mean, really think about that for a second. An entire organization that runs itself where the rules aren't enforced by some manager in a corner office, but by pure software. This wild, radical idea, that's the very heart of what we're talking about today.
All right, so let's break it down. What exactly is a DAO? Well, it stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. The easiest way to think about it is like an internet-native company where all the rules are baked into the code itself using things called smart contracts, and every single decision gets made by the community. No CEO, no board of directors.
And you can really see the massive difference right here. On one side, you've got the old-school, top-down structure of a typical company, often very secretive. But on the other side, you have the DAO model, totally flat, completely transparent, and run by code that anyone in the world can look at and verify. This was a huge promise.
And you can bet that a promise that big got people really excited. I mean, this wasn't just pitched as a new kind of company. It was seen as a whole new way for people to work together all across the globe. This was the dream.
So, what was the big deal? Well, the appeal was just massive. First off, true decentralization. This meant power was in the hands of the many, not the few. Second, everything, every vote, every transaction, was transparently recorded on the blockchain, which builds a ton of trust. And finally, it was open to anyone, anywhere. All you needed was an internet connection.
But like a lot of beautiful dreams, this one was about to turn into a complete nightmare. And that brings us to the single most infamous event in the history of DAOs, a disaster that nearly brought the whole concept crashing down before it even got started.
So picture this. It's 2016. A brand new project comes along, and it's literally just called the DAO. It was designed to be a kind of decentralized venture capital fund, and it just exploded. It raised a staggering $150 million worth of Ether. The whole world was watching, thinking, this is it. This is the future.
And then, it all came crashing down. An attacker found one tiny vulnerability, a single flaw in the smart contracts code, and managed to drain about a third of the entire fund. We're talking roughly $50 million at the time. In just a matter of hours, the dream had completely collapsed.
The fallout from this was absolute chaos. Just a month after launching, the hack happened, and that forced a really brutal decision in July. The Ethereum community had this huge controversial vote to do something called a hard fork, which is basically like hitting a giant undo button on the blockchain to give everyone their money back. But this move was so divisive that it literally split the blockchain in two, creating the Ethereum we know today and a separate chain called Ethereum Classic. It just shows you how high the stakes had become.
Now, the DAO hack was obviously this huge bombshell, but it wasn't a one-off thing. And if we want to understand why it happened and why so many other DAOs have stumbled too, we've got to look under the hood. We need to dissect the anatomy of these failures.
And when you really start to pull these failures apart, you start seeing the same problems crop up again and again. It almost always boils down to one of three things. The code itself has a fatal flaw. The way decisions are made is broken, or the economic incentives are just badly designed.
Let's start with flawed code, because this was the big one for the DAO hack. See, the thing about smart contracts is their biggest strength is also their greatest weakness. Once that code is out there on the blockchain, it's pretty much set in stone. That means one tiny bug, one little oversight can lead to catastrophic and totally irreversible losses.
Okay, next up, broken governance. This idea of community consensus sounds amazing on paper, right? But in reality, voter apathy is a huge problem. It's super common for only a tiny fraction of people to actually show up and vote. So you end up with a small minority making these massive decisions for everyone else, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of decentralization, doesn't it?
And that brings us to the third point, bad economics. A lot of these early DAOs had their incentives all wrong. They basically encouraged people to speculate and chase quick profits instead of thinking about the long-term health of the project itself. And when everyone's just trying to get rich quick, the whole system becomes super unstable and can just fall apart.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty bleak, right? But here's the thing. This is not a story about permanent failure. In fact, it's the opposite. These painful disasters were like a necessary wake-up call for the entire ecosystem. The community literally had to learn from the ashes and start building smarter, stronger systems.
These early failures basically put all the weaknesses on full display for everyone to see. The code was vulnerable, the voting systems could be easily dominated, and the economics were often just shaky. And you know what? Admitting you have a problem is always the first step to fixing it.
And that's when the real innovations started to kick in. In direct response to these problems, we saw a massive push for solutions. Suddenly, things like rigorous security audits and bug bounties became standard practice. People started experimenting with totally new and fairer ways to vote, and developers got laser-focused on designing economic systems that actually worked for the long haul.
So here's the real takeaway from all this. The hack of the DAO and those other early stumbles, they weren't the death of the concept. Not at all. They were a trial by fire. They forced the entire space to grow up, to move past the dreamy ideals and get serious about building stuff that was actually secure and resilient. Which leaves us with one final big question. You know, they always say failure is the best teacher. And man, these were some expensive, very public lessons. So, after going through all that, after being forged in the fire of its own mistakes, is this technology finally ready to deliver on that world-changing promise?